The Sri Lankan Navy was about to face one of the most complicated situations to tackle: the rescue of an elephant in the middle of the ocean. Did they manage to save it? We'll find out. Patrols along the southern coasts of Lankan are common. It is something the Navy must carry out regularly. However, unlike other countries, this island is something special. The southern regions are a natural paradise, not only with stunning landscapes, but also with remarkable biodiversity, visible across its beaches, from Negombo to the tranquil waters of Marissa, each with its own unique charm. This area is rich in natural beauty, such as the Kokilai Lagoon, located between two stretches of jungle, and the beaches of Unawatuna and Bentota, famous for their appeal and their proximity to the historic Gal Fort. As a tourist hotspot, it is also a place where boats may stray into restricted areas, making it routine for the Navy to stay vigilant. Additionally, soldiers must always be prepared for rescues, as the island's diversity includes a recorded total of 32 marine mammal species, including whales and dolphins, which can be affected by human interference. But that day was different. The Navy was more agitated than usual. Not only had a ship been spotted moving at high speed, but several other boats were following it. Sailors were rushing back and forth, all heading in the same direction toward a single location. They had observed a strange anomaly, and due to its size and movement, it could have been anything. Given the potential danger, several soldiers and professionals were deployed for that type of emergency. Among these professionals were some prepared for combat situations, severe weather events, or any threat requiring focus, even rescues of individuals if necessary. All of this makes one thing clear. It's rare for sailors to be surprised by marine creatures or any kind of situation. They are in a habitat where dolphins, turtles, and whales can be found around every corner, along with challenging scenarios like rescuing people or, in more intense moments, stopping illegal activities at all costs. But when they arrived at the site of the anomaly, they were met with something for which they were completely unprepared. Before them was the figure of a giant terrestrial creature, an elephant, floating in the water, which, for the moment, was almost still. At first, no one wanted to believe it, and the captain wanted to act cautiously to avoid making any mistakes. But it was real. There were no people, no boats, nothing. None of them were ready for what they had just witnessed, a situation that was strikingly clear and immediately caused conflict among them. Everyone asked the same question: what could they do? By then, even though the waves weren't strong, they were controlling the elephant's movements. Being out of its habitat, it had no control over what was happening and was drifting further into the ocean's depths. Every second was crucial, and they had to prevent the elephant from drifting too far. However, one wrong move could agitate the animal, leading to one of two possible outcomes. Either it could drown out of fear, or it could suffer a heart attack. Considering how far it had travelled, and for how long, it was undeniable that the elephant had been swimming for hours, and the pressure it was under must have been overwhelming. Thus, the idea of simply attaching a rope to a boat and pulling the animal back to shore was unfeasible, not only for the reasons mentioned, but also because they were far too distant from the coast. On top of that, even approaching the elephant could cause it to move further away. The weight, the movements, everything made this situation nearly impossible to handle. One wrong move could cause them to lose control of the operation. They had to make the most of the time they had while the waters were calm, as the currents in the Sri Lankan Ocean are strong and change quickly, especially near the coast. Even the most experienced sailors can be swept away by the force of the water. So, they had to approach by swimming or using small rafts. This way, they might be able to redirect the elephant, but there was a major conflict. If the animal interpreted their actions as violent or threatening, it would panic and start moving erratically. This could not only kill the elephant, but also endanger the lives of others, potentially causing severe injuries or even death to the rescuers. The idea of getting too close to the elephant, or worse, trying to get it onto a boat, was terrifying and fraught with risks. Every idea they came up with was dismissed within seconds, while other officers worked on contacting animal protection services to request help, or at least some guidance. Meanwhile, the rest of the team had to ensure the elephant didn't drift further away from the coast. When they reached the Animal Protection Centre, the first thing they had to be warned about, aside from all the challenges they had already been analysing, was the need for extreme caution. They couldn't even think about pulling the elephant with ropes because prolonged exposure to salt water could be fatal for it. Salt is toxic to an elephant's skin and internal systems. So, adding to the exhaustion from swimming, they were now facing an animal likely in critical condition, weak and moving increasingly slower. But the question remained, what was an elephant doing in the middle of the sea? There isn't a completely clear answer, but one thing was certain. It didn't end up there by accident or through some unnatural cause. The explanation is simpler. These animals are accustomed to swimming relatively long distances, and it's common to see them swimming in rivers, though not in seas. Most likely, it had tried to cross the Kokelai Lagoon, a body of water that connects two vast stretches of jungle, an area that is challenging for any living being to traverse. This is because recent waves of deforestation in the region have reduced the feeding and migration areas for elephants, forcing them to search for other places. This makes it clear that this elephant was likely not alone, but somehow became trapped during a flood or some disturbance, prompting it to swim for safety. However, it was no match for the currents and ended up in the ocean. Without knowing exactly where to go, it makes sense that the elephant simply swam wherever it could, unaware that it had drifted into the middle of the sea. But whatever happened to lead up to this moment isn't as important as what was happening right now. The team from the Animal Protection Centre confirmed they would send help, but out of fear that the situation might escalate further, the sailors decided to attempt a strategy to at least stop the elephant from drifting even farther into the ocean. Based on this, they decided to organise everything to help quickly while waiting for the team, with the guidance of their leader, directly starting to plan the operation that would take place in the next few hours to safely move the majestic animal. This made communication even more critical to the situation, and there was no time for any uncertainty. With this in mind, only the divers and most experienced personnel would be selected to enter the sea and face something they had never done before. They got ready. The experts studied the trapped elephant and the currents surrounding it, taking into account every detail, the visible fatigue in its movements, the direction of the waves, and the limitations of space. All technical aspects that were necessary for the mobilization. The first step was to form a human chain to serve as a barrier and guide. This was important and also required the sailors and experts to work side by side, synchronizing each movement to avoid startling the animal, so the team began to organize. Soon enough, the helicopter arrived with the rest of the team from the Animal Protection Centre. Meanwhile, the sailors were already in the water, preparing to work with little information. However, the expert team descended, each carrying backpacks filled with specific tools and equipment for handling large animals in extreme situations. Clearly, their presence brought calm to the team, who were preparing to enter the water. Their expressions were soothing, as it was obvious their work focused on such situations. With this in mind, they began to prepare. The plan was simple in theory, but required precise execution. The rescuers would position themselves in the water, forming a semicircle around the elephant. In this way, the more experienced divers took the positions closest to the animal, while others formed a support line to ensure that it didn't stray into deeper water. But it was hard to ignore the uncertainty that everyone felt as they all wondered things like, what is expected of us in this situation? How could their training, focused on human emergencies and naval operations, apply to rescuing a land creature trapped in such a hostile environment? All of this was something that perhaps even the animal protection team worried about, though they didn't show it in their expressions. As the wind picked up, making communication difficult, the divers underwater began to organize themselves and take up their positions. In this way, each member of the human chain knew that any sudden movement could startle the elephant, causing panic and further complicating the rescue. Thus, the approach was made cautiously. The experts went ahead, making signals and gestures to maintain order, directing the advance with slow and calculated movements, as if trying to convey calm to the elephant. And it was no wonder, the closer they got, the more they could notice the heavy breathing and the overwhelming exhalations, as it became increasingly difficult for the elephant and its movements slowed down. All of this accompanied by the sound of the waves and the water crashing against the creature. Clearly, the sailors were used to operating in extreme conditions, so they were not affected by superficial things like the tide and the waves, but they couldn't avoid how delicate it was to move with caution. Here, the value didn't lie in strength, but in patience and the ability to adapt to a completely new dynamic. Finally, the divers managed to position themselves on either side of the animal, and with that, the collective effort began to take shape. It was a bit hopeful as they were moving the elephant calmly without it being significantly affected, but the currents didn't ease, and on more than one occasion, the rescuers lost their balance, forcing them to quickly readjust. In situations like these, small disagreements are common as hours passed. They had already been underwater for 4 hours, and the fatigue was becoming noticeable, causing some sailors who weren't used to being underwater for such long periods to grow impatient. But that didn't stop them from remaining disciplined, and anyone who tried to rush was calmed down. Of course, the elephant was also a difficult case, as at times it would move its trunk and swipe with the waves, forcing them to retreat and coordinate again, which caused small but important delays. Everyone was working together and adapting to the situation. It could be said that the elephant had to do the same, as after being guided for over 5 hours to the shore, not counting the probable 12 hours it had already spent at sea, it was exhausted and had to find a way to keep moving, as its life depended on it. The effort continued, and they stayed in the process for 6 hours, but there was still a long way to go. As the sun slowly set, showing a brief twilight in the background, they kept going, pushing forward while reaching increasingly shallower waters. This brought them some relief, but they still hadn't finished. Although they were relieved, it wasn't enough to ensure the elephant's survival. After almost 10 hours of work, they were finally very close to the shore. It had been a titanic effort from the rescuers to move the elephant safely. An immense exhaustion from everyone who had pooled their efforts to achieve this. The creature, overwhelmed by hours of swimming, was clearly showing alarming signs. If its breathing had been heavy and its movements slow and erratic before, now this had been amplified significantly. Nearing the shore, the team knew they were entering the most critical stage of the operation. The waves, as twilight approached, were strong but remained calm, not moving anyone. It was almost a miracle that they had achieved what they did, especially with the currents not changing suddenly. Thanks to the human chain and additional rescuers who had arrived in support, while small Navy boats approached to guide the elephant without pressuring it, they had managed to create a delicate but harmonious balance that allowed them to get closer to the shore. Finally, the elephant touched land for the first time, and its progress continued until it was fully on solid ground. Its legs were still submerged in the water, but its body was now out of it, finally advancing. They aimed to get it to safety so it could receive treatment. Some rescuers jumped into the water to ensure its head stayed above the surface. Those final moments felt like an eternity, making it seem impossible. Clearly, the teams were exhausted and pushed to their limits. When its feet finally touched solid ground, its body collapsed, unable to stay on its feet, falling to the ground. But fortunately, it was alive. The beach looked somewhat gratifying, and finally, its struggle had ended. However, the work was not finished. Now it was the veterinarian's turn, who quickly rushed to provide immediate care. Clearly, the elephant was still aware enough to see that they were helping it, and as we know, elephants never forget. It likely wouldn't forget the help of all the humans who brought it to safety. On the other hand, the team couldn't celebrate yet, still soaked and exhausted as they had a monumental task ahead, making the veterinarian's job easier and stabilizing the animal. Thus began the process of caring for the poor animal. Once its body was resting and the veterinarians worked more calmly, the team could rest and internalize the immense journey they had undertaken, which was still ongoing. Later, the elephant was carefully transported to a specialized vehicle that would take it to a rehabilitation center. Throughout the journey to its recovery, things remained calm, and there were no obstacles, reviving both for the animal and the humans who had rescued it. Once at the rehabilitation center, the necessary process would begin to prepare the elephant for its return to the wild, while experts ensured all the support needed to avoid any consequences. It was all a beautiful effort carried out in collaboration by the Sri Lankan Navy and the Animal Protection Centre. A demonstration that we don't need to focus on just one thing, because when it comes to helping a greater cause, we are capable of surpassing ourselves and adapting to any situation. With all this, the team would never forget the day they set out, thinking they would be in a routine situation or something of medium scale that required their knowledge. But they faced something unknown. With this, we end the video, and don't forget to subscribe.